Hey, everybody, how's it going? I wanted to take a few minutes today and talk a little bit about how you can protect your organization from management turnover. So, we all know that when you have a multiple unit organization, when you have multiple locations, the linchpin is the managers, and they're the ones that ultimately are the ones that do the execution for you in the absence of you being there yourself. But what happens when a manager turns over? What happens when you lose a manager? And here's what I've found that happens most often. We know that it takes time and a lot of effort and money to be able to actually find and replace a manager. But what happens in that time as well? So, not only does it take time, effort to train them, but in that time, food costs go up, labor costs go up. Usually, what happens is sales will trend down, customer experience trends down because there's no one there that's watching over those things that are happening. So we know that all of that is taking place. And so it actually has a huge impact on your organization from a financial perspective. And not only that, the pattern that I've seen a lot is when you have, say, 3 or 4 locations, what happens is when you lose a manager, you as the owner has to drop down and actually oversee these things. And that means maybe you were planning on doing marketing campaigns. Maybe you're planning on growing your businesses or opening new locations. All of a sudden, you don't have the time for that anymore because you are stuck back in operations, back in doing a manager's job. So you're not able to do the things that you need to do. So I'm going to walk you through how I envision protecting yourself from management turnover. So here's what we have is kind of an organization chart with 2 locations. And so what's right here is I've got the owner at the top, then I've got 2 managers, so 1 manager for each location. Then I've got 3 supervisors on each side, one of which is an assistant manager, and then 3 crew below them. So the reason I do this is because we had managers in the past who, for example, might have 15 team members or 12 team members or 20 team members, whatever the case is. They're not able to have a good relationship with their crew if they have that many team members. They're not able to have that relationship. They're not able to work on their development and their performance and make them better and make sure they're executing all their duties properly and doing things the way that they should be. So we know that they spent so much time trying to do that that they were never able to look at the finances and the marketing of the location. So our solution to that is supervisors. So I believe that a supervisor can easily handle 2 to 4 crew members where they have a meeting every week. They focus on their development, they focus on what's going to happen, they check in to see how happy the employee is as well. Because if there's any issues, they can then address it. So the point is, we want to have some supervisors at that level. And the manager, instead of being able to handle 15 employees, which we know isn't possible, they can, however, have a solid relationship and a good in-depth one-on-one schedule with, say, 3 to 5 supervisors. So this is based on how many crew are actually at your locations. But the point I want you to know here is that we have an owner who's acting as a regional manager. We have 2 managers, and then we have an assistant manager. And so if, for example, this manager was no more, what would happen is you could easily have an assistant manager jump up and take their position, right? And then you could potentially have one of these crew move up and become a supervisor. So this kind of insulates you from that. So you have an assistant manager here that basically knows the manager's job, and then they're able to jump into that position with not a whole lot of time, and they're already pretty prepared for it. So that's a 2 location example. At 3 locations, how this changes is I suggest having 2 assistant managers right here, because what ends up happening is there is a greater likelihood of turnover when you have the 3 locations. So, what happens if you lose one manager at once and then you lose another one? You have to think, okay, what's the worst case scenario, and what happens if something even worse happens? Or in the eventuality of growth as well, if you're opening up another location, this assistant manager can then be promoted to a manager position at a 4th location. So that's huge. So you have the ability to not only handle the turnover that you had, but you also have the opportunity to be poised for extra growth as well. And I just wanted to share an example. I want to share two stories. One story is when I had two locations. So we'll go back to this example. I had set up a manager in training at my existing location, and I'd set up a manager in training for my new location. However, I didn't have an assistant manager. I just had the two managers. And what ended up happening is I ended up losing that manager before we even opened our second location. So I then had to drop down into the manager position for about 6 months while I trained people, which means that I actually was never able to spend any time with this manager over here. So this manager was kind of left alone because all of my time went to the brand new location. Now, just imagine what would have happened if I still lost a manager, but I only had one manager to begin with. There's no way that you can perform an owner's job plus two managers' jobs at the same time. There's no way it's going to be happening. So here we are at three locations. And as I made the jump from 3 to 4, what I didn't do is I didn't have an assistant manager. I didn't have an assistant manager. I had three managers in place, and I was going to run the fourth location. That was my plan. And what ended up happening is I ended up losing a manager. Okay. And so I had two managers in existence, but I also then had four locations. So I was running a location, one manager was running two locations, and then one manager was running one location. And so what ended up happening is instead of focusing on how do I build the sales in my fourth location, how do I make sure everything's done right, how do I grow my organization sales, we were in survival mode. We were like, how do we get through this? How do we survive? How do we even just make sure that we're, keeping our team members? How do we hire everyone and train them all? How do we just keep things going? So for almost a year, we were just stuck in survival mode, no marketing, no efforts to grow the business. We were 100% just trying to survive. And that is not a great place for any business to be in, not to be able to have the time to market. We were in a disaster mode. So the reason we have this set up at four locations, the big changes here is we have added in a regional manager right here. And the reason we do that is to have an extra layer of security, but also because when you have four locations, the marketing aspects, the admin aspects, there's a lot of other things that the owner can then take on. And the regional manager can focus more on the operational side of things. And it also provides an extra layer of security. And I'll show you how. We have four managers, so one per each store. And I recommend we have an assistant manager here and an assistant manager here. So in my organization, I have two locations in the east end of the city and two locations in the west end. So we want to have an assistant manager at each. So that way, if we lose a manager here, there's a replacement. We lose a manager here, there's a replacement. And, if we lose a manager here, we can drop down our regional manager here. So realistically, we are really, really set up well when you have this, because we have to understand that, managers on average might last 2 to 4, maybe 5 years. That would be fairly normal. But we also have to understand too, is that the unexpected does happen. And if we want to continue our organization and be poised for growth, what we're looking at doing is, for example, if this wasn't the case, if, we didn't happen to lose a manager here, so if we didn't happen to lose all of that or over here, we want to make sure that we're then able to go and maybe bring this assistant manager over for our next location and our next location. And so then we're actually poised for growth at the same time. So I'm sure that you may have some questions around this, and I'm sure this probably seems like way too much effort. But the thing we have to understand here is that the only thing constant is change, and that there will be turnover. And if we don't plan for that turnover, we are going to end up losing any progress, any momentum, anything like any goals that we might have had. We're not going to be able to achieve them because we're just back in survival mode and back in operations. And so our job is to know that that will happen and plan for it so that we're still able to grow and achieve our goals and scale as a multi-unit organization, even knowing that there will be management turnover. And so the key to this is having a leadership funnel, which takes people from crew to becoming a supervisor, to becoming assistant manager, to becoming a manager. And so we're constantly having people move up in our organization as we go, and then supervisor becoming an assistant manager. We want to constantly have a pathway for people to continually moving up. That way, as there is turnover, we're going to be prepared for it, And if there isn't turnover, that means we have some really amazingly well-trained people. Because picture it like this. If you had some really well-trained people in your organization with an extra 10 hours a week, imagine what they could be doing to build your business with that time. Likely right now, that's not the case. Right now, you have too much to do and not enough time. But imagine if you had rock star employees, rock star supervisors and managers that had the time to build your business and look at growing your sales and growing your locations. There's no limit to what you'd be able to accomplish, but we often don't set our organizations up like that. So this is why it's so important to have a funnel to bring people up and to protect yourself from management turnover. So if you have questions, let me know. I hope this was helpful for you, and reach out, and I'd love to help you implement this in your organization.